the bigger question becomes, why is identity only considered identity politics when it's not white, male, and straight? And the answer to that is because if you look at what it takes to win a national election, that's what the majority of the electorate believes.
Welcome to Raging Moderates. I'm Jessica Tarlov. My guest today is Representative Marilyn Strickland, a Democrat representing Washington State's 10th District. She's the former mayor of Tacoma, Washington, and she's in her third term in Congress. Congresswoman, thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you for having me today, Jessica.
Yeah, it's a pleasure. Before we started talking about makeup, but we're going to do more substantive things now. And
all right.
I kind of wanted to start big picture. You came into Congress in 2021, so after Trump's first term, and you were mayor of Tacoma for half of his first administration until 2018. How are you feeling about the moment? I realize this could go in a bunch of different directions, but I wake up every day and I kind of think what is happening and what can be done about it? So what is happening and what can be done about it, Congresswoman?
Yeah, so the second term of Trump feels very different because, we really didn't know what he was going to do in his first term. And, it was not ideal. It was awful. But I don't think anyone thought that the degree of awful in the second term would happen so quickly. And we were not aware of the Project 2025 playbook back then, right? And so everything you see happening was spelled out as clear as day in Project 2025. I think what's overwhelming in this, Jessica, is that the speed with which they are doing everything is overwhelming. And I remind myself, it is only August in the first year of his second term, and it feels as though it's been an eternity already. And so, we're doing everything we can in Congress to amplify what's happening because, as you know, there's so much crap that comes out every few hours. And what we can't do is chase every single transgression. I believe we need to stay focused, and everyone has a different lane. And so pick your lanes, decide what you want to amplify. But I would say more than anything, this is as much about communicating to the people in the country as it is about how we develop policy to combat it.
Yeah. So, one of the major areas that we've been talking about, certainly having to communicate, but also needs an action plan as well, is what's going on with the maps and the redistricting. So Texas has approved their maps. They're going to get their 5 seats. Gavin Newsom has his ballot measure that'll be on there in November and seems to have captured the attention. If we're all vying for a spot in the attention economy, Gavin Newsom is winning that. Whether you're a big fan or not. But how are you kind of looking at the redistricting wars? I saw that Washington State will not be engaging in this. You guys have a bipartisan redistricting commission, and there will be no new maps coming out of Washington before the 2026 midterms. What's your take on the redistricting wars and also how you think Democrats should be dealing with it? Are you all in on this nuclear approach?
Yes, well, I am completely 1,000% all in this nuclear approach because we cannot sit idly by, wring our hands, or be self-righteous when so much is at stake. But I will also, remind folks that the reason they have to resort to this is because they know their policies are so terrible. They are doing so much damage to the American people. Their brand is doing badly. And so the only way they can win is to cheat. So Governor Abbott did what he did in Texas and let's remind people listening to and watching that some states don't even require voter approval, right? So Texas can make this happen with a vote of the legislature. But in California, for example, this has to go before the people. But I 1,000% support doing everything we have to do to make sure that we can win because there's just too much at stake right now.
What happens in a few years? So let's, put aside the idea that Trump's going to run for a third term, and he's going to dance around it, and maybe he will try. But I just that's too much for a Tuesday morning for me to really engage with. That we'll have a third term. There are people and some even on our side who, are enthusiastic about quote unquote meeting the moment, but are scared about the implications of this for the long term. Not just, California will go back in 2030, but that if we're just constantly in a fight with Republicans who have shown themselves to be nothing more than a rubber stamp for whatever Trump wants at
Mhm.
this point. But I imagine it'll transfer on to Vance or whoever's in control, that it's like a winner take all approach to politics. Like, do you think that there's any hope to ever return to some sense of normalcy?
I do think there's hope to return to normalcy. And it starts with Project 2026, which is having the Democrats take out the House, because that's really going to be our first firewall against what this administration is doing, and then coming together behind one candidate and uniting in 2028. And I do think there's a chance to return to normalcy. And, I remind folks that Donald Trump as a candidate is very, very unique. He spent decades building this brand as someone who was a deal maker and a successful businessman, even though he is a crappy businessman. And so going into the elections, he already had brand ID, unlike any other candidate. And then he gets into office in the second term, brings Elon Musk, takes a sledgehammer and the chainsaw, doing what they're doing, and really just trying to destroy trust in institutions. And remember, in addition to trying to steal seats for 2026, what they have been doing steadily is eroding trust in institutions, trying to erode trust in voting, trying to erode trust in media, trying to erode trust in education, trying to erode trust in government, because they think that the chaos is going to keep them in power and give them power. And so I do believe there's a chance, but we have to win in 2026, Jessica. It is so vital. And then we have to take the White House back and get back to a state of normal. And I will tell you, in my district in Washington, I'm in Washington State's 10th congressional district. And I often say we are a snapshot of the entire state. And in some ways, a snapshot of the country, right? I have urban, rural, suburban. I'm considered not a frontliner, but I have Republicans and Democrats and independents who are part of my base who support me. And I think about how so many people I speak with from all political directions are saying, this is not normal. We cannot go on like this. We all have to work together to restore democracy. And so I do believe, especially in local communities, people know what's at stake. And then there's the performance of what we see coming out of Washington, D.C. And honestly, Jessica, the way the press covers it. And so we have to do a lot of fighting locally and having these conversations with people who care about democracy and doing what we have to do to restore it.
What do you see as the major failing of how the press is covering it?
So, I said this last night. I had an event in the district last night, and I talked about the fact that, well, I said this before, even like last year and year before. Donald Trump is good for the media business, whether you support him or whether you despise him, right? Whether it's rage bait or full support. And having him in the mix and this idea of, journalistic fairness, showing both sides. And I don't disagree with showing both sides of an argument, but this false equivalency and some media outlets refusing to tell the truth is what's hurting us. And I ask myself sometimes, how do voters who don't live inside of our political bubble get accurate information, get truthful information, and have some of these hard conversations in person so that we can get to a place where this country can get back on track again? And I don't have the answer to that, but so much of it is how we receive information, how people may not be as discerning as they need to be, and the fact that Trump is good for business and media outlets is like, don't just worry about being fair and balanced, worry about telling the truth. That's your duty.
Yeah, I mean, I think about this a lot, certainly as a liberal that lives in a conservative media
Yep.
ecosystem. And we were talking the other day on the Five about Trump's lasting legacy. And I think that there are many, but my top one was this war on truth and objectivity, that we have been pushed through some sort of filter system where we're looking out the window, right? It's a beautiful sunny day where I am out in Long Island. And if Donald Trump told someone it's pouring rain, there's a decent chance that they just tell you, like, well, actually, it's a pretty shit day, now that I'm taking a look at it. And that is something, in the conversation about elasticity of institutions.
Yeah.
And I get it, the institutions plus Mike Pence saved us
Hmm.
in 2021 on January 6th. But
Right.
the way that our brains have been reconfigured and the way that we absorb information and also where we go for our information is not something that can rubber band back into place. And, I agree with everything that you're saying, right? Like we vote the same way. We probably go to very similar news sources for our information. But there's like the mainstream, I even hate using that term, like
I
legacy
know,
media,
right?
whatever you
Because
want.
it's become weaponized, right?
Yeah, it's just also like it's a buzzword that doesn't mean anything anymore because people's definition of what fits in MSM isn't what it used to be, and legacy media, and even what independent journalism is. Like I'm an elder millennial, and what independent journalism looked like as I was growing up is very different than to what it is today. But this idea that we are not going to find a way to be on the same page again no matter who you support politically, is something that I find really disturbing. And I have two little kids, like a 3.5-year-old and a 16-month-old. I can't even imagine what media literacy is going to look like as they're coming up. Like whatever the next iteration of TikTok journalism is, or, however they're going to get their news.
Yeah. And I don't think that's unintentional, right? And again, the business model feeds on that and promotes it. And to your point about, it's a beautiful day and someone says, oh, no, it's raining. Yeah, you're right. It's a crappy day. And this, you can go to any source online and you can find some outlet that will confirm that, right? So the confirmation bias that makes it so easy to hunker down and say, see, I told you, I told you.
Absolutely. And, JB Pritzker talked about this a little bit in a speech that he gave about Donald Trump's threat to send in the National Guard. So we're recording this on Tuesday. By Friday, when this comes out, I don't know if the National Guard will be in there, but he had a great line where he said, to the members of the press who are assembled here today and listening across the country, I'm asking for your courage to tell it like it is. This is not a time to pretend here that there are two sides to the story. This is not a time to fall back into the reflexive crouch that I so often see. And I agree with him, but in defense of that defensive crouch,
Yeah,
so many people got over their skis. Like even you said about the first Trump administration, that we thought that it was bad, but it looks like a pretty normie Republican administration now in light of
right.
what Trump 2.0 looks like. And I feel
Yeah.
like everyone is so afraid. I mean, they're afraid of being out of a job,
Yep.
but also afraid of inflaming tensions even worse than they already are.
Well, and you know this too. I mean, what do journalists want? They want access. And so what does he do? He cuts them off or he sues them into submission. And so it's just a very bizarre place, I imagine, for journalists to exist right now in the media companies that, that do that work.
Yeah. Well, especially if you want to maintain some
Mhm.
semblance of lack of bias, right? That you're just out
Right.
there reporting the news and what you see. In terms of the National Guard being sent into DC, potentially into Chicago, he's threatening he was in Los Angeles, New York, Baltimore, any kind of major blue city, um, you name it. He's interested in sending the National Guard. Project 2025 playbook for sure. How are you viewing all of this? And I mean, I've spoken to some people who think that it's actually like something that we shouldn't be screaming about 24 hours a day, that there are more important, I hate to say more important issues, but there are other things that we can be focused on, and that it's a lot of bluster, and that the Trump administration feeds off of seeing Democrats losing their minds.
No, I completely agree. And I made this comment, earlier in our interview, Jessica, where I said, we can't chase every single transgression, but some of these things are very important. And if you think of the cities that he's targeting, it's interesting because to your point, it is very performative, right? And, in Washington, D.C., I'm hearing reports of restaurants having sales plummet because people are just staying inside because they don't want to get caught up in the drama. What's interesting, too, though, is that you have governors of red states that have crime that is much higher than these other cities sending their National Guard, right? Tennessee, West Virginia. I mean, it's ridiculous. And Louisiana. And so they are here sending National Guard over to these democratic cities. At the same time, they have crime in their own states that are much higher than what's going on over there. And so again, it's another example of performative drama and bending the knee. But you never want to discount how people feel when they're walking around the city and they see National Guardsmen everywhere.
Yeah, but likewise, you don't want to discount the fact that people also walk around their city and they see crime or that they've been victims of crime. Like over 50% of DC residents say that it's a serious or very serious problem. And I think, we've gotten stuck in this kind of vicious loop where we end up defending indefensible things. And then Trump looks, I don't want to say he looks like a reasonable guy, but he certainly looks like somebody that knows that today is a sunny day, in fact.
That's absolutely fair. And because I come from local government, there's the conversation about, well, I feel unsafe and there's crime happening. And then people often say, well, look at these statistics. It shows it's not true. And I tell people perception is reality when it comes to safety. If people don't feel safe, then there's some action that has to be taken. And so I absolutely understand your point. But at the same time, it's part of the playbook that Vice President Harris talked about. She said that Trump was going to use the military to try and intimidate civilians. And you see it happening all over the place.
Is that perspective, which I think is so important. You've done politics in a different way than a lot of the people that you work with now. So is that perspective something that you've been imparting amongst your colleagues? How have you found the transition from working in local government like that to going to Washington? Or the other Washington, I should say.
No, that's a great question. I often say that having served in local government and city government is actually the best background to have when you go to a place like Congress, because, you're in Washington, D.C., you're looking at national policy, and sometimes you lose sight of the people at home and how those policies affect local government and the people who live within the communities. And what's really cool about Congress is that, we have about a handful of former mayors. And so, Richie Neal was a mayor in Springfield, Massachusetts, Robert Garcia, Pete Aguilar. And so I serve with people who have local government experience, and it's always important to bring that lens to a policy discussion. And let me give you one example. When there was a discussion about the American Rescue Plan during the pandemic, they were trying to figure out how to disperse the money. And a lot of us said, you know what, why don't we let the cities determine how they want to use the money, because every community is unique. And so I do believe that having local government experience makes you a better member of Congress because you bring that lens.
I like that a lot. I also thought it was important to do that because, not that everyone always blames the people at the top, but at least if funds have been dispersed, you could at least say, like, it's the local area that didn't spend that money at all, or that they didn't spend that money well. And you can see because the comparable city in X place actually did a better job of this, or we're using it in this way. Do you feel like leadership of the party and folks who have been there for a long time understand how important it is to have that kind of on the ground perspective? Because, you said you're not a frontline Democrat, but a lot of the frontliners and the ones that we kind of hold up as these examples of folks who can, win over Republicans and Democrats and independents, they take that local feel to the way that they do their job in Washington. Like they're actually talking about things like fixing potholes and making sure that daycare is run better. And I'm always appreciative of that because politics, it's fundamentally like an unsexy job, right? It's civil service and dedicating yourself to your community. And a lot of that is not glamorous, to say the least.
It's not glamorous. It won't get you on MSNBC every night, and it's not going to make a headline, but it is the bread and butter of what people expect government to do well. And so as we even look at the earmarks, they've rebranded it to something else, but those are really important funds that help local projects get to the finish line. And so again, to my point, having a local government lens makes you better in Congress because you can see what has to happen. And we always communicate that to leadership, regardless of how long they've been there, but also to leadership in place right now. But I just do believe that, having that experience makes you more effective. It helps you decide how you disperse funds. And local communities so appreciate the money that they get from the federal government when it's supporting a project that they've been working on for a long time. It's often when I call that last money in that gets it over the finish line, and we get to attend ribbon cuttings because we just got money in the door. $3 million for a transit center in my district that I attended yesterday for ribbon cutting. And this is an important center that's going to help more people get access to public transportation. Housing is being built in that area. And again, the nexus between housing and transportation, I know because I was mayor of Tacoma for 8 years.
Absolutely. That's exciting. And I thought it was a lost plot line in the Doge cuts, actually, like how much you could contextualize or personalize what they were going after by making it about local stuff. Say, like, oh, your transit center isn't coming now because of a Doge cut, instead of making it, a story about big balls and what Elon Musk is doing.
Support for the show comes from Vanta. As a founder, you're moving fast toward product market fit, your next round, or your first big enterprise deal. But with AI accelerating how quickly startups build and ship, your security expectations are higher earlier than ever. Getting security and compliance right can unlock growth or stall it if you wait too long. Vanta is a trust management platform that helps businesses automate security and compliance with deep integrations and automated workflows built for fast-moving teams. So whether you're a startup tackling your first SOC 2 or ISO 27001, or an enterprise managing vendor risk, Vanta's trust management platform makes it quicker, easier, and more scalable. The results? According to an IDC study, Vanta customers slash over $500,000 a year in costs. Establishing trust isn't optional. Vanta makes it automatic. Go to vanta.com/ProvG to save $1,000 today through the Vanta for Startups program and join over 10,000 ambitious companies already scaling with Vanta. That's VANTA.com/ProvG to save $1,000 for a limited time.
You're relatively fresh face for Congress. And, we went through the 2024 election, obviously very disappointing loss, top of the ticket. I happen to think it was better down ballot, at least in the Senate, than it could have been. So I'm thankful about that. But how are you feeling like Democrats are doing, 8 months into the new Trump administration and heading towards the midterms, which are really a must-win situation for the party?
It's completely correct in saying that it's a must-win situation. All things considered, I believe that we are doing well, and I will stand by that comment. And I reject this idea that our party's in complete disarray and we don't know what we're doing. And you said something in our last conversation about not losing the plot. And I've been saying this a lot lately. The American people are not looking for something that is very complicated, right? They want housing that they can afford, whether they rent or buy. They want access to jobs that pay well and have benefits. They want access to healthcare that's not going to break them financially. They want good schools for their kids and safe neighborhoods. They want to get that retirement they've been paying into and they have earned. And they just want to be left alone to live their lives in peace, right? Regardless of where you're from, who you love, whatever. And when we talk about all the things happening with this administration and we chase every single transgression, it often feels, Jessica, like we lose the plot. That's the plot. That's the American dream. That's what we should stay focused on because it's not real. It's not real for a lot of people. You have people working 2 jobs, doing everything that we ask them to do, and they just feel like they are just underwater all the time. So how are we addressing those problems? I'll tell you one thing, taking away healthcare from millions of people is not going to address that problem. Firing veterans from the VA is not going to address that problem. Taking food benefits away from working families isn't going to address that problem. So how do we, amidst all this stuff happening, which, all legitimate concerns, but how do we not lose the plot and get back to why so many people are just pissed off right now?
I agree with you. I mean, obviously the Republicans were smart to have the Medicaid cuts, come after the midterms so that
Right.
we'll look like lunatics out there screaming like you're going to lose your health care. No, really, you're actually going to lose your health care. And, I'm bullish on taking back the midterms. But one
Yes.
thing, there seems to be a bit of a disconnect sometimes. So like that's all the right stuff to be talking about, and that's we need an American dream. I had Mallory McMorrow, who's running for Senate in Michigan, on. She's talking about a new American dream, which hit me in all the millennial feels, and she's kind of changed it to meet the moment of what's going on with housing affordability. For instance, it's the latest that anyone generationally speaking, has ever been able to afford their first home and things like that. But do you feel like the party, or even what is your answer to this? Like, talking the talk is one thing, but walking the walk is quite another in terms of having policies that can resonate with people. Like, I know no tax on tips actually has a lot of Democratic support, but that's something obviously that Republicans take to the proverbial bank, right? That people remember that. They remember all of the catchphrases. I mean, MAGA, right? And we have been accused of, and I think very guilty of, talking too much and not having enough action. So, what's your take on that?
So I often say that when you are an elected official, whether you're in Congress or in the mayor's office or in the state legislature, you are in the communication business as much you are in the policy business. And we just have to do a better job of communicating very clearly and very succinctly. So when we say we need more housing, let's put a number to it. Let's talk about how many units of housing we plan to build in this next administration or in when we take the House back. And if that means that we have to work with local government to deal with some of their drama with land use, then let's talk about that. But we have to make the key message the one that people can easily understand. I mean, talk about a message that people understand easily. Make America great again. It's about the nation. It harkens back to a time when things maybe weren't so great for us, but it's very memorable. And so what is our thing going to be, right? Restore the American dream. I'm not going to sit here and like market a slogan for the Democratic Party, but we have to talk in clear, succinct things. We want to build 500,000 units of housing within the next 5 years. Okay, that's a marker. Now, how do we make that happen? But that's what people remember, right? And so we have to talk in ways that regular folks outside of our political bubble who are just trying to survive every day and live their lives and mind their business, understand with ease, and does it resonate with them? I will also add this though now, and tell me if you disagree with me on this. When we did the many autopsies of the last election, right? The top of the ticket underperformed compared to those of us in Congress. Congress actually outperformed the top of the ticket. And I think about the fact that people say, well, it was the economy and it was all these policy things. And I think Democrats have to understand that sometimes it's not even policy related. It's how the party makes people feel.
Yep.
And we have to get rid of these litmus tests. We have to ask ourselves, are we serious about winning or not? And are we going to do everything we can to win first and then implement all the policies we want? And so I believe there's a reckoning that has to happen within the party about whether we're going to get in our feelings about everything or just say, look, for now, let's focus on winning. Let's do that first. And then when we get control, we can implement the policy. So I think there's a conversation about not just policy and all these great ideas, but how do we make people feel when they think about our party and our brand? That's a really important conversation that has to be had.
I totally agree. I think back to an interview before the election with a longtime Democratic voter who switched her vote to Donald Trump. And she said that she would take like chaos over preachy, and that the Democratic Party just too often made her feel like bad about herself and, just wasn't engaging like a normal human being. And, a core component of that, at least what people argue about the party, I didn't think it was as big of a problem with Vice President Harris's campaign as some other people made it out to be, but was identity politics and the use of identity politics and the way that we talk about our communication. You are Korean American, you're a Black woman, first Black representative from the Pacific Northwest to go to DC. How do you think about identity and this conversation around identity politics? I mean, one, example that cropped up just as I was even prepping to come and talk to you. I saw that Leader Jeffries released a statement about the firing of Lisa Cook from the Federal Reserve Board of Governors. And the first line is, Dr. Lisa Cook is the first Black woman to ever serve on the Federal Reserve Board of Governors. And the response from overwhelmingly a Democratic base was, why would you put that as the first line, right? This is about authoritarianism. This is about Donald Trump wanting to control every facet of American life. The fact that she is Black has nothing to do with it. What do you think?
So I would say the fact that she's Black has a lot to do with it, because this administration has been overt in their anti-Black agenda. And so I don't fault Leader Jeffries for saying that. But I think the bigger question becomes, why is identity only considered identity politics when it's not white, male, and straight? And the answer to that is because if you look at what it takes to win a national election, that's what the majority of the electorate believes, right? And so I think that not that they believe what I just said about, everything about anti-Blackness, which is very apparent. And I have receipts to show that this administration is completely about anti-Blackness. But it's the conversation about what we know is true, what we know is just, and what this administration is doing sometimes doesn't mesh with what it takes to win a national election. And that's just the cruel reality of electoral politics on a national scale. District by district, it's different because we as members of Congress cultivate relationships with our communities because we have to run every 2 years. So in many cases, it's not just the Democratic brand we represent, it's the brand of each individual member that we represent. And that's a different value proposition than running for president every 4 years and running under the banner of a Democrat. And so I have no problem with what Jeffrey said, but it's interesting to me that you shared the reaction from Democrats. And if Democrats are thinking this, what do independents think, right? What do Republicans who could be in our column think about this? And so it's not saying to suppress calling out the wrongs, but I still come back to the question, why is it identity politics when it's not white or male? When people say working class, that's an identity. When people say seniors, that's an identity. When people say everything, but it always feels like if it's not a protected class, then it's okay. But if it's a protected class, it must be identity politics.
I like it. That was a great answer. And made me think about it because my first reaction, and it could be also, liberal living in a conservative media world where I was just like, oh,
Right.
crap, like this is going to be the next few days of my life, right? That I have to talk about this.
Right.
But so very much appreciate your perspective. And I think, from the whole conversation, I can see how you have managed your political career just being results oriented, and then the rest of it kind of falls into place, which is the healthiest place for a politician to be. I want to make sure, though, I ask you our last question, which is, what's one thing that makes you rage and one thing you think we should all calm down about?
The thing that makes me rage is this completely false narrative that the economy is stronger and job growth is higher when a Republican president is in the White House. That is just patently false. Well, even when if you surveyed 100 people today, you would say, who's better on the economy, Democrats or Republicans?
Yeah.
Republicans would win that survey. And, if you look at the record, every single president that's been a Democrat has had much higher job growth, lower unemployment, and they've reduced the deficit. But to the general public, they think the opposite is true. So that just pisses me off to no end. And I think we have to do a better job of communicating what the facts are. And what was the second part of your question, Jessica?
What do you think we should all calm down about?
Oh my God. We need to calm down when companies try to engage in marketing, right? The Sydney Sweeney and her pants, her jeans, the Cracker Barrel drama. And, companies market and communicate and make changes constantly because they may see their market share going down, or they want to appeal to a broader customer base. And for people to get so worked up about those things is kind of amusing to me. And I come from a background of marketing and communication. And so when I watch these things unfold and just the absolute outrage, I'm like, y'all, calm down. Okay, we have much bigger problems than ad campaigns to sell products or to rebrand a restaurant.
Sometimes a rebrand is just a rebrand.
Exactly.
I hate to disappoint so many people that I know and love, but it's ugly, but that doesn't mean it's woke.
Exactly, right? And although I will say that, the gentleman sitting in the rocking chair with overalls and the look on his face, because now I started looking, right? So, well, what's so bad about this brand? And I looked at it's like, doesn't exactly say welcoming to a broad swath of people. And I'll just leave that there.
We'll leave that there. Congresswoman Strickland, it was so nice to have you. Thank you for joining me.
Thank you, Jessica.